Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Alhamdulillah. I wanted to, today, bismillah, what I wanted to talk about, because some issues were raised yesterday and some people brought to my attention some of the statements, particularly concerning some of the things that are happening now in the Muslim world. So what I thought I'd do, which relates very much to this idea of our ummah having 3 maqams. Each one of those maqams have 3 degrees, 9 altogether. So these 9 darajat of these 3 maqams. The first maqam is zalimun li nafsihi, those who oppress themselves. The second maqam is muqtasidun, those who are practicing moderately their religion, in the sense that it's not the entire focus of their life. And then there's the sabiqun bil khayrat, and those are the people that really have made their entire existence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and really attempting to awaken to the divine in every instant. That's the highest maqam, and that's where he begins. So he has tadalli and then taraqqi. He begins by the highest maqam, he descends to the lowest, and then he goes from the lowest back up to the highest. So he called his book Tadalli wa Taraqqi. The point that he's making is there are many ways to be Muslim. Now, one of the problems with a lot of Muslims is that that highest maqam can actually be a delusion. And so you get pathological expressions of religion where people are actually not well, and so they go into a type of psychosis, like a religious psychosis. One of the interesting things about psychotics is very often their expression of psychosis is a religious expression. They believe that they're having revelation, they think the angels are talking to them, or they think the devils are talking to them, and perhaps they are. But that's a very common expression of psychosis. Now, one of the most important works on revolution is the section in Aristotle's Politics. He discusses the reasons for revolution, and he had a theory about what he called stasis, which he felt that societies, and this comes out of his teacher Plato, who uses, whether it's Plato or Socrates, I mean there's debate about that, but Socrates in the Republic uses a human being in order to attempt to understand justice. He relates the human being to the society. So the society has attributes that are very similar to a human being. It has a head that controls it, like the government. It has arms that defend it, like the soldiers. It has a stomach that sustains its nourishment, like the merchants. So he uses these to describe the shahawat and the quwwat ghadabiyya, irascible soul, the concupiscent soul, and then the rational soul, what Imam al-Ghazali called the sage soul, the dog soul, and the pig soul. But one of the things that he says is that societies like human beings get sick. So you can have a fever in a society. A society can become feverish. And he said that what maintains the health of a society is brotherly love, which is very interesting because one of the most important things in the Prophet's message was to afshu salam bainakum. La tu'minu hatta tahabbu. You don't love, that you haven't really achieved what the purpose of faith is until you love one another. And then he said, أَلَا أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ إِذَا فَعَلْتُمُوهُ تَحَابَبْتُمْ. Can I tell you something that if you did it, you'll start loving one another? أَفْشُوا السَّلَامَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Spread peace amongst you. Our greeting is a greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum. That's a Muslim greeting. Assalamu alaikum. And so the idea of spreading peace in a society is so that the society, because salamat al-jasad is health. The Arabs call being health al-jasad al-salim, right? Al-aqd al-salim fil jasad al-salim. The Arabs say a healthy mind in a healthy body. So the word they use for health is salim, because wholeness is health. And so peace is when things are working holistically. War is when there's antagonism, either from outside, like bacteria that invade the body, and then the body fights to protect itself from these foreign invaders, or inside where the actual body begins to break down. So societies and bodies share a lot of analogous aspects. Now, one of our great scholars, and he was the last Sheikh of Islam in the Ottoman Empire, his name was Sheikh Mustafa Sabri. He had a huge influence on some of the well-known scholars of the 20th century. He was a brilliant man. I mean, I would argue really one of the brilliant minds that our ummah has generated. He lived in Istanbul. He was from a small city in Turkey. He was in the inner workings of the Ottoman Empire, which the ulama were. So he was a mufti, he was Shaykh al-Islam. But he experienced the secularization of Turkey, and he described these events. And then he experienced the breakdown of the Turkish nation from within, right? So this is the breakdown of the social body, and from without. So the bacterias and viruses, usually ideological or violent, that invade the body. But one of the things that really struck me in this book that he wrote, which is a 4-volume work, موقف العقل والعلم والعالم, and in it he tries to refute a lot of the materialism that he was seeing emerging. So we think materialism is a recent problem with Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, and materialism goes back to the Greeks. The Greeks were debating whether everything was material or whether there was a spiritual component to the universe. This is an ancient debate between materialism and the idea that we're more than just matter. Ancient debate. But materialism became very, very widespread in the 20th century. It arose out, I mean, it begins probably with, in some ways, within the Christian tradition, the reemergence of it. Although we had our materialists, and Ibn al-Jawzi in his extraordinary book Talbisu Iblis, Talbisu Iblis is how the devil deludes you. So delusions of the devil. It's the way yulabbis alaykum, that he pulls the wool over your eyes. In Talbisu Iblis, he has a chapter called the chapter of the naturalists, and how Iblis has fooled the naturalists, thinking that everything is materialism. So this is not new. I mean, that was almost 1,000 years ago. He's writing this book. So even within the Muslim community, we had materialists. We had people arguing for materialism. So this is always going to be a debate. Are we matter? Are we spiritual? Or are we a mixture of both? The hylomorphic view that most of the Abrahamic faiths took, that we're an admixture of these two, of the world and the other world, of the animal kingdom and of the angelic realm, this joining of the two, the spiritual and the material. So anyway, he writes in here, and this is what I thought was very interesting. One of the things he says is that he talks about the philosophy that was spreading around at his time, the materialism. So he says that it's here. I'll just read it here. فيجب على علماء الإسلام رفع التهمة عن الدين، تهمة كون الأغنياء يحافظون على طبقاتهم الممتازة في ظل حماية الدين، مع حرمان الفقراء عن هذه الحماية، محكومين على الصبر والسكون وممنوعين عن التواصل بالقوة إلى حقوقهم المضيعة. وهذا التفريق بالنفع والضرر على الرغم من أن الدين إن كان باقيا في هذا الزمان فعند غير الطبقات العليا يجب على علمائنا رفع التهم عن الدين، تهمة الظلم على الفقراء وعلى نفسه في خذلان أنصاره ونصر غير الناصرين لأنصاره، بأن يسدوا النصح المتواصل إلى المترفين ويقول الإسلام الذي يصونكم من الثورة جعل في أموالكم حقا للفقراء وإن لم تؤدوه عن طيب نفس وتدعوهم في بأسائهم فلا يحتملها الزمان إن احتملوها، وإن كانت نتيجة عدم الاحتمال خسارة الثائرين مع المثور عليهم وانتفاع غيرهما من تجار مبادئ العصرية الهدامة الماهرين، ثم يرفع العقيرة لإيقاظ المترفين عن نومهم المقيم على شفا جرف خطر يدهمهم في الدنيا قبل الآخرة من قبل مواطنيهم الذين يبيتون في ظلامين من الجهل والليل ويظلون على جمرتين من حرارة الشمس وحمى الأمراض ويلبسون الأسمال ويشربون الأوحال التي لا يسوغ شربها لذة أو طبا. I mean, this is a really stunning, that he wrote this in 1946. So he says, it's absolutely necessary for the scholars of Islam to remove this accusation about our religion, the accusation that it is a tool in the hands of the rich to defend their social status in the shade of the protection of religion, while at the same time depriving the poor people from their rights and demanding that they simply be patient and that they not do anything to change their conditions, and that ممنوعين عن التواصل بالقوة إلى حقوقهم, that they are prohibited from establishing through force their rights that are due to them. Now remember that he's living at a time when Marxism was spreading like wildfire in the Muslim Ummah. So this is a very Marxist interpretation, but it's still being used, this idea of religion suppressing the poor people and forcing them just to bear the slings and arrows of tyranny so that the rich class can live in their bubble. But he says that despite the fact that the religion is, if it remains at all in this time, it remains amongst the poorest classes more than the wealthy classes. And then he says, it is absolutely necessary for our scholars to remove these accusations of the religion, the accusation that it oppresses poor people, that and the fact that it has failed to help them, and that it only helps those that are opposed to them, and give constant advice to the mutrafin, the extravagant people in our communities, who say to them, Islam is what protects you from revolution, but it has also put a right in your wealth for the poor people. If you do not give this right to the poor people with contentment, and you leave them in their wretchedness, the time won't bear this problem, even if they bear it. In other words, it's going to blow up at a certain point. So he's saying the ulama have to warn these wealthy people that this is for your own protection. You need to stop oppressing people, because even if they're patient, as their religion commands them to, at a certain time, the time itself will force these circumstances to erupt. I mean, this is a really important message. And then he says, despite the fact that the result of their not bearing these tribulations will be the loss of the revolutionaries as well as those who they rebel against, everybody's a loser in this. And the only people that will benefit from it are those people that are spreading these modern destructive ideas against religion, that they're so clever at using, they're mahirin at this, to say, look at religion, here's your religion, look what it does. It's just a destructive force. It's no good. This is amazing advice. Then he says, if these people don't wake up from their sleep, these mutrafin, and realize that they're on the precipice of a very dangerous pit that will encompass their dunya before their akhirah. It's going to darken their dunya before their akhirah. From their own citizens, the ones who are sleeping in two darknesses, the darkness of ignorance and the darkness of night. Wearing worn out clothes and living on the coals of the heat of the sun and the fever of their sicknesses. Drinking bitter draught that neither pleasure allows or even medicinally. It's not even, sometimes you take something bitter because it's medicinal, but what they're drinking isn't even medicinally bitter. And he said, this is why I wrote this book, because when I left, he says, وَفِي آخِرِ كَلِمَتِي إِلَى الْقُرَّاءِ الْكِرَامِ ألخص ما بعثني على التأليف هذا الكتاب مما رأيت في مصر التي آوتني بعد مغادرة بلادي فأصبحت بردا منها يعنيني ما يعنيها من خير أو شر ويتحتم علي أن أخدمها بما يتوقع من مثلي شيخا من مشايخ الإسلام حنكه الزمان ولم يفت في عضده ما لقيه من الشدائد في سبيل المصارحة بكلمة الحق والصدق التي تكون على الأكثر مرة مع التنقيب في درس مسائل العلوم المتعلقة بحياة الإسلام العلمية النافعة في صيانتها من تيار الإلحاد الحديث. فأقول إن دولة الترك المسلمة التي دفاعها بسيفها عن حياض الإسلام ضد أعدائه يستغرق ثلثين من تاريخه وتندرج في ذلك عند التحقيق أدوار الحروب الصليبية الموجهة إلى البلاد الإسلامية المنتهية بالنسبة إلى تلك الأدوار في ردها على أعقابها. هذه الدولة كان آخر سلاح حاربتها به الدول الوارثة لضغائن تلك الحروب نشر الإلحاد القائم على العلوم والمبادئ المادية بين أبنائها المثقفين ونشر المبادئ القومية بين العناصر المندرجة تحت لوائها. وقد وجد أول هذين السلاحين عونا للأعداء في قلب تركيا فكان استعمارهم كفتح الحصن من داخله كما وجد السلاح الثاني رواجا عظيما في أطراف تركيا. So he says, I'm writing this book because I came to Egypt. He was actually put on trial for death during the first secular regime here after the fall of the caliphate. He was put on trial for death. The judge could not bring himself to give him the death penalty because he said, I don't feel justified in killing this man who is simply living according to his principles and speaking the truth that he believes. And he's done nothing other than that. And so he said, but we exile him. So he was exiled to Greece. He wrote a letter. This is Sheikhul Islam, all right? This is the highest position that a scholar could hold in the Ottoman Empire. He goes to Greece, he writes a letter, and in that letter, he just says, I am Mustafa Sabri, Sheikhul Islam, and I'm asking any Muslim country to take me as a refugee or as a guest, because I have no country. Now I'm in Greece and I don't want to die in a non-Muslim land. So some Egyptian man working in the embassy got wind of this, and he said, I might lose my job, but he said, what would Christian countries do if the Pope was kicked out of Italy? You know, they wouldn't take him in. Like, this is a disgrace for us that this man has no country. So he was taken to Egypt, and he began to teach there. But what he said is he was distraught by seeing in Egypt the very things that he had witnessed in Turkey. He thought the lands of the Arabs would be different, but he said he found in some ways it was worse. And he actually says that they forget that this Turkish dawla, that it was rooted in the Turks, but it was never a nationalistic civilization. He said they spent 2/3 of their history fighting the enemies of Islam, protecting the borders of Islam. This was their civilization. It was protecting and expanding the Muslim protection. Because even the Protestants, after the Protestant Revolution, many of them migrated to countries that were held by the Ottomans, because the Ottomans didn't distinguish between Catholics and Protestants. So they could get out of persecution by going to places like Transylvania, which had the Edict of Toleration based on the Muslim idea of tolerating other religions. And we know John Locke was influenced by Edward Pocock, who was a student of the Ottoman system. And his letter on toleration was inspired by the Muslim toleration of this millet system. So he says that he found 2 weapons that they used. The first weapon was materialism, to make people think that religion was superstition and a foolish thing to believe. And he said their tools for doing this became very powerful with a lot of the material sciences that they developed. But the second tool that they used was nationalism. So he said to destroy Turkey from within, they used materialism. But to destroy Turkey from without, they used nationalism. So that the places where the Turks were protecting, like Palestine, suddenly the people in Palestine saw the Turks as occupiers. And people forget that Arabs fought against the Turks. They allied with the British and fought against the Turks. And the British promised them all these things. And much of what we're suffering now is from the betrayal of Muslims of that time. So these are the effects, and nobody wants to deal with what really happened. They just want to blame everybody else. It's all somebody else's fault. But unfortunately, we inherit the troubles of the past. We inherit them. The only country that didn't, of the Arab states that were under, the only one that didn't break their ties was the Libyans. They were the only ones, which is why the Turks really loved the Libyans. In 1958, King Idris came here and actually restored the maqam of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. There's a big plaque there, 1958. A plaque that says that he came, he saw that it was in disarray because it was a period where they weren't really respecting these places as much anymore, and he redid it. But then the Libyans, in their Thawra, Iblis wala Idris, with their slogan, give us Iblis and not Idris, they overthrew a man who used to do night prayers. And I know this because I know somebody who knew him personally very well, Mustafa bin Halim, who was his ambassador to Italy, who told me that he was one of the most pious people he knew. This was the man that was ruling their country. They overthrew him, Iblis wala Idris, they got Iblis, and then they overthrew this guy, and now there's 1,000 Iblises. And this is what revolution is. This is what he's saying. Everybody loses. Everybody loses. So we have to understand these things at a deeper level and not be fooled by slogans. One of the things that the Prophet ﷺ said, that towards the end, he said there's going to be sununa khada'a. There will be years of deception. Yu'taman al-kha'in. The treasonous one will be considered trustworthy. وَيُخَوِّنَ الْأَمِينَ. And the trustworthy one will be called a treasonous one. يُكَذِّبَ الصَّادِقِ. The one telling the truth will be deemed a liar. وَيُصَدَّقَ الْكَاذِبِ. And the one being called, the liar will be called a truthful one. This is what our Prophet warned us. So we have to be vigilant about what's being done to us as a community. The Muslims, our natural allies should be the Christians amongst this materialism. But there are people that want to make sure the Muslims and the Christians this is the Iago factor. Shakespeare's play about Iago, Santiago Matamoros. He was called Saint Iago, the Moor killer. He was the Spanish patron saint of killing Muslims. And Shakespeare did this play with a Moor, Othello, Uqayl, it's an Arabic name, Othello, and Desdemona, the European and the Moor, coming together in a marriage, but Iago saying, no, we're not going to let this happen. Some people say that this was because Mansur al-Dhahabi, the great Moroccan, sent his ambassador, Abdul Wahid al-Fasi, in 1600, he sent him to Queen Elizabeth's court to convince the Protestant Christians to ally with the Moroccan Muslims against Spain. So the Spanish, Iago, that's why he calls him Iago, because he's Spanish, Santiago. The Spanish didn't want this alliance to happen because Mansur wanted to arrest the Americas from the Spanish and have Muslims and English take over from the Spanish. This was the idea. But he died in 1603, so it didn't come from that. But anyway, the point is there are people that don't want these religions to work together against the common enemy of atheism and materialism. These are much greater enemies. Christians believe in the Day of Judgment. They believe in the Ten Commandments. Our ethics is based on the Ten Commandments. Read Ali Imran, right? 151, 152, 153. Read those verses. That's the Ten Commandments. Those are 10 commandments in the Quran, which our ulama said those are the wasaya al-ashara allati utiya Musa. And immediately after those verses, it said, Atayna Musa al-kitab. We gave Musa the book. This was Musa brought the Ten Commandments. This was the ethics of our civilization. The Jewish, the Christian, and the Muslim civilization. These are the Abrahamic faiths. We're in the umbrella of Abraham. The two greatest religions on the planet, Islam and Christianity, share the Ten Commandments. And now the Ten Commandments are being completely eradicated. There's a website, Ashley Madison. Life is short, have an affair. It has 37 million followers. And it's a website that promotes adultery. It's valued at $1 billion. This is destroying our civilization. This is Iblis destroying our civilization. And then mocking God. God will not be mocked. You know? The mockers of God. The Christians don't want God mocked. We don't want God mocked. But people don't want these alliances of virtue. The Prophet said, دُعِدْتُ إِلَى حِلْفِ الْفُضُولِ قبل الإسلام. I was called to an alliance in Jahiliyyah. If I was called to it in Islam, I would respond. In other words, if people from some other faith said, let's ally for virtue, then I would ally with them. So, now, revolution happens. And clearly what he said, لا يحتمل الزمان وإن احتملوا. Time sometimes will not bear it, even if the people do. In other words, it just happens, it erupts, and it's fitna. And this is why he was warning the mutarafin, stop oppressing people, because people can only take so much, and then yathurun. But Islam is a regulating mechanism of our nafs al-amara. It's supposed to control the nafs al-amara, right? This is part of Islam. But people say, oh, that you're just the opiate of the masses. So instead of the opiate of religion, let's just give them real opium to bear their troubles. You know, because it used to be the African American community survived in America through slavery with religion. That's what they did. The blues was all religious originally. It was swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. You know, there's a greater day coming that we're going to get, we're going to get our day on the Day of Judgment. There are African-American Muslim tombstones in America with the finger like this of Muslims. We have many, because there were many of them were Muslim. 1/5 of the slaves were Muslim. And they have this. In other words, they died despite being enslaved by people, still believing there's a day of justice. There's adala, Yawm al-Qiyamah. We believe in Yawm al-Qiyamah. So you might have 60 years of oppression. You're going to have an infinity of justice. And so this is whether you believe or not. This is the real deal. Do you believe this promise or not? Because if you want to change things in the world by making things worse, then you're a fool and causing untold suffering on other people. And this is why our ulama were very opposed to revolution. Not because they didn't think that oppression was wrong or they were trying to keep the oppressors in power. That's not. Because they saw it from a metaphysical perspective, first and foremost, that this is an ibtila from Allah, لِيَبْلُوكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That, when I said yesterday, some religions say life is suffering. We don't say that. Because some people have lives without any suffering. Really, they have perfect health, they wealth, friends, they live in very good times. But all of life is an ibtila. And this is the difference between our religion and their religion. Suffering is an ibtila and pleasure is an ibtila. They're both ibtila. لِيَبْلُوكُمْ بِالْغِنَى أو بِالْفَقْرِ بِالْمَرَض أو بِالصِّحَّةِ. Health is a tribulation, because what are you doing with your health? Sickness is a tribulation. How are you responding to the sickness? This is our religion. But if you remove metaphysics, if you remove God from the world, then the world makes no sense at all. And then, you should fight and just, tear everything down to get your justice, if that's what it takes. But if you believe, Allahumma, قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِ الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتَنْزِعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُعِزُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِيَدِكَ الْخَيْرُ. If you believe that, say to them, O Allah, Malik al-Mulk, the one who really possesses all dominion. You give this contingent dominion to whom you please, and you take it away from whom you please. And this is why when there was a revolution in Medina, they asked Malik about it. He said, if the one being revolted against is like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, then help protect him. If he's not, then da'a ظالما ينتقم الله منه بظالم آخر. Then let Allah take vengeance on one oppressor with another oppressor. That's how Malik viewed it. Like, they're both oppressors. He's an oppressor for rebelling against him, but he's an oppressor for creating conditions that people wanted to rebel against him. So just let him duke it out, because Allah is an muntaqim. They saw God, and God's been removed from the scenario, and it's all Marxism. People have no idea how much Marxist thought has penetrated the modern Islamic tradition. They have no idea. Most of these guys, Muhammad Khalid was a Marxist before he became Muslim. Sayyid Qutb was a Marxist before he became Muslim. He was a Marxist. I mean, read his early history. He was a Marxist. And they brought in these ideas. Ali Shariati went to Sorbonne, studied Marxist thought. And they brought they say, this is Islam. Abu Dhar, look at Abu Dhar, he was fighting for the poor people. And so they started framing Islam into this framework of Marxist thought. But who is Marx? A man who hated God, who had boils on his bottom his adult life. Seriously, he couldn't sit down. He was always in pain. He hated God. He was also he was also a total racist. I've read his letters to Engels about the Algerians and how ape-like the Arabs were. The great German Marx. So this is the reality of it. And it's not to say that Marxist criticism doesn't have some validity. I'm not denying that. I'm not that stupid, but the criticism is entirely predicated on atheism, because there's no ibtila here. There's just oppression and oppressed. So the oppressed have no metaphysical view of what is this? It's an ibtila. That's how we view it. It's an ibtila. How do you respond to it? What's the best way to respond to it? And that's where the challenge comes. So Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, who is my teacher, and I believe, he traditionally they call it Sahibu Zaman. Sahibu Zaman is the man of his age. Like Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was the man of his age. He was Sahibu Zaman, right? صاحب الزمان يفوت كثيرا من العلماء في عصره. Many of the ulama miss them. They don't see them because they have hasad, because they يستغني بعلمه عن غيره. غنينا بينا عن كل من سوانا وإن كثرت أوصافه ونعوته فإن جاءنا فمرحبا بمجيئه وإن فاتنا فيكفيه أن نفوته. You know, this is the they call that fakhr in the Arabic tradition. You know, like غنينا بينا, we're rich in ourselves. We don't need anybody else. You know, and Imam Shafi'i has abyat like that because it's, you know, Imam Shafi'i was a mujtahid mutlaq. He didn't need somebody else. But you can miss the time. Like Abu Bakr al-Tartushi, one of the great Maliki scholars, a student, a teacher of Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, Fatahu Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. He missed him. He wrote books against him. Imam al-Maziri, one of the greatest usuli scholars of the Maliki tradition, Fatahu Abu Hamid, he missed him. He was tirb lahu min aqranihi. He missed him. So people miss the people of their time. Sheikh Abdullah, in my estimation, Sahibu Zaman, I haven't seen anybody that has his encyclopedic knowledge of our tradition as well as knowing the age he lives in. He wrote a book called Tanbih al-Maraji' ala Ta'sil Fiqh al-Waqi', for want of a better translation, awakening to the reference points. Awakening to the reference points concerning the foundation of pragmatic jurisprudence, or the jurisprudence of reality. And what he's arguing in there is that our ulama were pragmatists. They were not idealists. That idealism is always the domain of zealots. Zealots are always idealists. They want the ideal world. They want to eliminate evil. They want to make sin illegal. This is their goal, to create paradise on earth. This is the Marxist dream, to create paradise on earth. Once we get rid of all the evil capitalists, once we establish equality amongst the masses. There's no equality. Some people are more attractive than other people. Some people are more eloquent than other people, right? So we know in the United States that tall people will get jobs before short people. Allah says in the Quran about why they made him king, Allah said, we gave him knowledge and height. And people vote for tall politicians over short politicians. This is social science. And Allah says that in the Quran, one of the reasons that he was made king was because he was taller than everybody else. I once realized the great blessing, because I'm average height. I mean, in Turkey, I'm kind of tall, which is nice. I was once on Hajj, and a group of Malaysian Hajis went past me, and I was like 2 heads above the whole group. And I felt what it must feel like to be tall. You know? Yeah. I think Wilt Chamberlain, who was over 7 feet tall, they used to ask him, how's the weather up there? And he would spit and say, it's raining. So you can be too tall, where it becomes a little freakish. But anyway, I saw a car accident once, and this guy, short man with a kind of one of those, what they call wife beaters in America, you know, very strong arms. He got out of his car. He was so angry, and he started headed to this car. And I thought this is going to be a fight, because it was the other guy's fault. The other guy got out, and he was so tall. He was like twice as tall as this guy. And suddenly the guy starts smiling, you know. And so there's a great blessing in having just height, you know. It is. And one of the things about the Prophet ﷺ is nobody ever appeared taller than him. That was one of his miracles. Even though he was of middle stature, everything about the Prophet is middle. He had wavy hair. It wasn't short. It wasn't kinky. He was of moderate stature, right? His skin was neither pasty white nor was it dark. It was a middle. It was like the harvest moon. It had a kind of reddish tone to it. What they call azhar al-lawn. Walam yakun amhaq. You know, he was azhar al-lawn. He had a middle tone. Everything about him was So he was of middle height, but لم يطاوله صاحبه. Whoever was with him never appeared to be taller than him. He always, and they know that people of stature will always appear to be taller because stature gives height. So he says, Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, who wrote this book, Tanbih al-Muraji', which is one of his most important books in my estimation. This was a footnote in the book. He says, إن مسألة تغيير المنكر في هذه الأزمنة أصبحت في معظمها تتعلق بتغيير الحكام بما يسمى بالوسائل السلمية التي لا تلبث أن تتحول إلى صدام، وفي بيئة غير سلمية يترامى فيها شرر الكلام لتشعل نار الحروب. ولهذا كان للأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر شروط. فقد روى أسامة بن زيد رضي الله عنهما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: لا ينبغي لأحد أن يأمر بالمعروف حتى يكون فيه 3 خصال: عالما بما يأمر، عالما بما ينهى، رفيقا فيما يأمر، رفيقا فيما ينهى. أخرجه الخلال. The Khalal, Abu Bakr al-Khalal, was a great Hanbali muhaddith and scholar. And he took the musnad of Imam Ahmad, but he had his own addition. So he's a thiqa in hadith. So he says, this question of changing munkar in these times that we're living in has become in many ways related to this idea of changing the rulers. So the idea that in order to change what's the vice in our cultures, we have to get rid of the rulers. This is a very common belief amongst many modern Muslims. And it's said to do so with peaceful means, right? Like democracy, so we can vote them out if we don't like them. But it quickly can change into conflict, sidam, clashes, especially in environments that are not peaceful in the first place. And words, the sparks of words will be thrown about and they will actually ignite the flames of war. And for this reason, Amr bin Ma'ruf, enjoining virtue and forbidding vice, has conditions. Usama ibn Zayd, may Allah be pleased with both of them, said that the Prophet ﷺ said, it is inappropriate that anybody who commands to good should not do so until he has these qualities. That he knows, he's an alim of what he's calling to, and a scholar of what he's prohibiting, and he's also gentle in his call and gentle in his prohibition. This is from Abu Bakr al-Khalal. وَاسْتِقْرَاءً لِلنُّصُوصِ وَالْمَقَاصِدِ. And he says, through inductive reasoning, through looking at the particulars of all of these texts that we have, استقراءً للنصوص والمقاصد ذكر العلماء 5 شروط. Our ulama have mentioned 5 conditions for Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi an al-Munkar. 5. There are 5 conditions. أن يكون الآمر عارفا بحكم ما ينكر. That the one commanding should know the ruling of what he's commanding. In other words, is it wajib? Is it mandub? Is it mubah? Is it khilaf al-awla? Is it jaiz? Is it mubah and jaiz are pretty much the same. There is a distinction. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ أَمْرًا, because the makruh goes under the jaiz also. So that's a distinction, because the jaiz contains mubah and makruh. وأن يكون أمرا مجمعا عليه أو قريبا من المجمع عليه. And that what you're commanding has to be an agreed upon thing and not something that there's difference of opinion, or at least قريبا من المجمع عليه. So when there's very little difference of opinion, then it's permitted to condemn it. Now this is, إذا عمت البلوى, you have different ahkam. When things become widespread, then changing it would lead to a fitna greater than the thing itself. So if you have a makhraj or something like that. So these are what the fuqaha and the ulama worry about. فَالْمُخْتَلَفُ فِيهِ لَا حِسْبَةَ فِيهِ. That in which there's difference of opinion, there's no hisbah. Hisbah is the social regulation of vice. So the muhtasib is the one who is in the society, it's a type of, it's like it's a type of religious police, really, in classical Muslim societies. Today, it's probably closer to what they call the ombudsman. It's these people that don't they interact between the government and between the people to try to create better conditions and things like that. But anyway, the hisbah, he said, if it's muhtarafi, there's no hisbah in it. There's no muhtasib. And we know that women fulfilled this role also. Sayyidina Umar had shafa or shifa. She was the muhtasiba of the souk in Medina. So she would go around and check. What they used to do, she had a stick. She would go, and if they were displaying dates, she would look under to make sure the dates under were as good as the dates over. Because one of the things, if you buy strawberries or something, they always put the big giant ones on the top, but underneath you'll find the small ones. This is a type of khud'a, it's like tricking you. Because you look at it and you go, oh, that looks, and you get it, then you find underneath it, you got tricked, or they're not ripe or something. So this was, she regulated the weights and measures. She would go in with her own weights and put them on the scales to make sure that they weren't cheating with their weights. Because sometimes they would shave off to give less, right? إِذَا كَالُوا يَسْتَوْفُونَ وَإِذَا وَزْنُوهُمْ, right? إِذَا كَالُوا وَوَزْنُوهُمْ يُخْسِرُونَ. When they weigh for themselves, they want the full measure. But when they themselves weigh for others, they stint them. لا تبخسوا الناس أشياءهم. Don't diminish what. إذا اكتالوا. So he says here, and then the third one, so that's the first is that he knows the ruling. The second is that it's agreed upon. The third, وَأَنْ يَكُونَ ظَانًّا إِفَادَتُهُ, that he believes there's a benefit. Dhann, in usul, you have yaqeen, you have dhann, you have shak, and you have wahm. Yaqeen is absolute certainty. You're certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, right? You're certain. That's why in Western legal system, felonies, the bar is much higher than in civil court, right? When you're dealing with penal, especially murder, they have a very high bar in order for there to be no doubt. So it's beyond any reasonable doubt. You have to really be certain that the person did it. If there's a reasonable doubt, you can't convict them. Even if it's pretty obvious he did it, but you don't have absolute certainty. There's a makharaj. So dhann is when it's more like the civil. The yaqeen is certain, beyond a reasonable doubt. Dhann is like civil court, where it's pretty obvious. How do you what did? Yeah, more likely than not. So it's propensity. So we have a lawyer in the audience. So yeah. So this is what dhann is. It's the propensity that now. There's another, which is ghalib al-dhann, which is where it's really close to beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's not there. So it's a higher bar. So there's a khilaf that do you have to believe the benefit in commanding is the propensity is there, or is it fairly certain but not certain? I was fairly certain but not certain. There's a khilaf. Imam Ahmad has two narrations. So وعن أحمد روايتان في غلبة الظن إحداهما لا يجوز. So in one of them, it's not permitted if you just have dhann. You have to have a sound. إذا لم يغلب على ظنه. والأخرى يجب ذكرهما أبو يعلى. Abu Ya'la ibn al-Farra is one of the great Hanbali giants. Imam Dhahabi said that he really, the madhab of furu' he's the one that set the stage for the madhab of the furu' of the Hanbali school. Brilliant and very important scholar early. I think he dies in the early, maybe mid 5th century. وَأَنْ لَا يُؤَدِّي إِلَى مُنْكَرٍ And then وَأَلَّا يَخَافَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ وَعَلَى مَالِهِ وَعَلَى غَيْرِهِ. He has no fear that he's going to be harmed, or his wealth and property will be destroyed, or somebody else will be harmed in doing it, or their wealth or property will be destroyed. This is a condition of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. وَأَلَّا يُؤَدِّرَ مُنكَرٍ أَكْبَرَ فَيَكُونُ حَرَامًا. And that it doesn't lead to a vice greater than the one that you're actually condemning. In that case, it's haram. فَلَوْ أَدَّى إِلَى قَتْلِ الْآمِرِ بِدُونِ فَائِدَةٍ تُرْجَى مِنْ وَرَائِهِ لَمْ يَجُوزْ. So if it leads to the death of the one commanding or forbidding without any benefit hoped from it, then it's not permissible. كما لو أدى إلى اقتتال الناس. وفي الحديث الذي رواه حذيفة لا ينبغي لمؤمن أن يذل نفسه. قال كيف يذل نفسه؟ قال يتعرض من البلاء لما لا يطيق. وحديث عبد الله بن عباس إذا رأيتم أمرا لا تستطيعون غيره فاصبروا حتى يكون الله يغيره. وروى سعيد بن جبير قال قلت لابن عباس أمر السلطان بالمعروف وأنهاه عن المنكر فقال إن خفت أن يقتلك فلا. ثم عدت فقال لي مثل ذلك وقال إن كنت لابد فاعلا فما بينك وبينه. It's an amazing statement of Ibn Abbas. So he says that, and the same is true if it will lead to fighting amongst people. And the hadith that Hudayfa relates, a mu'min, the Prophet ﷺ said, the mu'min should never humiliate himself. And they said, how would a mu'min humiliate themselves? And he said, by exposing himself to a tribulation that he can't bear. وحديث Abdullah ibn Abbas said, if you see something that you're unable to change it, be patient until Allah changes it. And Sa'id ibn Jubair, one of the great tabi'een, and he was killed by Hajjaj because he spoke the truth to Hajjaj. He was killed by Hajjaj. And he actually said, I'm the last one you're going to kill. He was one of the righteous people. He said, you won't kill anybody after me. And Hajjaj laughed. He died right after that. And but Sa'id asked Ibn Abbas, can I command the Sultan? Right? Can I tell him he should be doing this and not doing that? And Ibn Abbas said, not if he's going to kill you. And then I asked him again, and he said the same thing to me. But then he added, if you have to do it, it's between you and him. In other words, you know, that's a kashf from Ibn Abbas. Like he just saw Sa'id was going to do it. But it's done in private. There's a whole, because Sa'id was an alim. قال تعالى ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم. Don't kill yourselves. Allah says, don't kill yourselves. لا تقتلوا أنفسكم. إن الله كان بكم رحيما. Allah is merciful with you. He's not asking you to kill yourselves, blow yourselves up. This is not our religion. لا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. Don't throw your souls to destruction. Allah went into creating each one of you. I want you to think about this. From the time, we're all related. Every single person in here, at some point in our lives, we have a mother, and then maybe a father, or at the same time, mothers and fathers. We're all cousins. At some point in human history, every single person in this room is related to the other person. We don't know at which point. Some of the Hussainis or the Hassanis that are here, you could find out if you just looked at your ashjar, because they all go back to the same people. Everybody's related. From the time of the first two human beings, Adam and Eve, your parents, because you have a line, two parents, and then the next two, and then the next two, and then the next, all the way up to today. All those parents that gave birth to you, right? And each one of our parents had 4. So it's a very mysterious thing, right? It goes all the way out and then it goes back in, because we're all little sections of a massive spreading out. Each one of us is a section. If you did it visually, it would be very beautiful to see it, because you can see it goes like this, but it's going like this. But for us, so it's like inverted and then the opposite direction. Every single one of your parents had to survive childhood illnesses, pregnancy, childhood illnesses, sickness, plagues, wars. They had to have enough food to eat. They had to also not be infertile. And the vast majority of them married because that was the sunnah of maybe some people had rape because of the wars and pillages. So, a lot of people, that's why the Prophet, one of his miracles is there was no fornication in any of his ancestors. He said, I am the son of marriage and not of fornication. But many human beings will have that in their history just because of the nature of rape and wars and pillage and things like that. But the prophets, they didn't have. So we had to survive all that to get here. It's not just your parents. It's not just the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We're talking about thousands of years to get you here today. In Imam Ahmad's Musnad, it said, there's no soul except all the souls back to Adam and Eve in his lineage helped produce him. And so what? You just throw that out? You just annihilate that from the world like that? All those people, that every mother that took care of her child in your ancestry to make sure that you didn't die, that gave their food when they were hungry to make sure you didn't die, like Aisha, who saw the woman who was hungry and yet she gave the dates to her children, and she went and told the Prophet ﷺ, and he said Allah will forgive her just for that act of preferring her children over herself. Every mother that did that, every father that worked to protect that family, to bring home the food, all these things, this is human life. مِنْ أَجْلِ ذَلِكَ كَتَبْنَا. For that reason, we wrote over Bani Israel, مَنْ قَتَلَ نَفْسًا بِغَيْرِ نَفْسٍ أو فسادا في الأرض كأنما قتل الناس جميعا. It's as if you kill one soul, it's like you killed all of humanity. Because people don't understand what it took to bring a soul into existence. And you look now at how the shedding of blood, and this is what the angels ask God. أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاء. Are you going to put in there what sows corruption and sheds blood? The best of the two Adams, kun ka khayri ibn Adam, be like the best of two sons of Adam. If you raise your hand to me, I'm not going to raise my hand to you. I'm not going to do it. Why? I'm afraid of God. That's the best of the two sons of Adam. Imam Baghawi relates a narration that says, Sayyidina Uthman took that madhab. He sent the people home. He didn't want fitna. He didn't want bloodshed. He said, let them take my blood. I don't want Muslims to die over my blood. Let them kill me. That's what Uthman, he's on this madhab. They said he took the madhab of Ibn Adam. He sent Hassan and Hussein home. Sayyidina Ali sent Hassan and Hussein to protect him. He had protection. Abdullah ibn Salam got up on his roof and said, I was a Jew and I became Muslim. Wallahi, I saw this man sacrifice everything for the Messenger of Allah. And they said, get the Jew off the roof. This is the Khawarij. Get the Jew off the roof. But Uthman, he was reading the Quran, fasting. He didn't even lift his hand. He let them kill him. Because he didn't want to be the one that brings bloodshed into this ummah. That's when the fitness happens. Sayyidina Umar was the door that would protect from the bloodshed, but Uthman wasn't going to be the one. I'm not going to do this. But because his blood was shed, all the fitness starts in our ummah. The Prophet said that's where it would start. He said, لا ترجعوا بعدي كفارا يضرب بعضكم رقاب بعض. Don't become kuffar after I'm gone. You're killing each other. This is our religion. واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء. Remember this blessing. You were enemies and He brought you together. Look at the Muslims now killing each other, dropping bombs on each other. What is this? This isn't our religion. It has nothing to do with our religion. And that's what these ulama, they weren't supporting tyrants. You know, people call Sheikh Abdullah Alim al-Tughat on these stupid websites, إعجاب كل رأي برأيه الرويبضة, all these brilliant scholars and geniuses on Facebook, writing their little comments, calling his تعزيز السلم في المجتمعات الإسلامية تعزيز الحكام الطغاة, supporting the evil rulers. Right? He just doesn't want Muslims shedding their blood. He said to me once, he said, I don't understand how these ulama can give these fatwas. How are they going to stand before Allah? Look at the doors of blood they're opening. And they're not out there, you don't see them out there fighting on the jabha. All these guys giving fatwa for suicide bombing. Right? They give their fatwas from their 5-star hotels. Right? Seriously, where's the ulama that are blowing themselves up? Because our Prophet fought. He was right there with his people fighting. Where are they? These guys writing these fatwas, go and fight. Ad-dam alayya, uqtuluhu wa-dam alayya. Kill him and the blood is on me. Where are they? You show me where they are. You know, all these Palestinians going and blowing themselves up. And where are their ulama? Why aren't they doing? Oh, I'm more important. Okay, so now we're all bayadiqa. We're like the pawns in your shatranj, your game of chess. You're the wazir. You're the queen. The faraz. You know, the Persians called it the faraz. You know, the Arab chess, the queen was the weakest of all the pieces. It was the French that let her loose. La ilaha illallah. Anyway, sorry about my screed. Just really, it's very sad. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Don't kill yourself. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. قال ابن الجوزي في زاد المسير فيها 5 أقوال. There's 5 opinions about this. ومن هذه الأقوال لا تكلفوا أنفسكم عمدا ربما أدى إلى قتلها. Don't do something, some action that will lead to your being killed. Don't do it. وإن كان فرضا, even if it's an obligation. وعلى هذا تأولها عمرو بن العاص في غزوة السلاسل. Amr ibn al-As, one of the 5 duhat of the Arabs. Amr ibn al-As, the Sahabi, whose son is very important in the hadith tradition, Abdullah. حين صلى بأصحابه وهو جنوب. He prayed, he was the Amir, and he needed a ghusl, he needed a ritual bathing. في ليلة باردة واحتج بالآية. And then the Sahaba, some of the people that were with him, they were upset about it. They went back to the Prophet and they said, Amr led us in prayer and he was junub because he did tayammum. So the Prophet called Amr and he said, Ya Amr, صليت بأصحابك وأنت junub. Did you pray with your companions and you were junub? فقال يا رسول الله إني احتلمت في ليلة باردة وأشفقت إن اغتسلت أن أهلك. I had a wet dream on a cold night, and I was fearful that if I took a ghusl in that weather, I would kill myself. فذكرت قوله تعالى ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم. I remembered Allah's words, إن الله كان بكم رحيما, that Allah is merciful, don't kill yourselves. فضحك رسول الله. So you all laughed. There's a sunnah to laugh hearing that. So you followed the sunnah. Alhamdulillah. The Prophet laughed. فضحك رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أخرجه أبو داود وأحمد. فكيف يصح. Now Shaykh is saying, فكيف يصح حمل الحديث الذي رواه الحاكم وليس في الصحيحين على أن الآمر كان متعمدا أن يقتل. So let me ask you, how is it possible to take the hadith that Imam al-Hakim relates, and it's not in the 2 Sahih, because Hakim tried to find the hadiths that were Sahih but not in the Sahihain. That's why it's called al-Mustadrak. It's trying to yastadrik al-ahadith, trying to find those hadith that weren't in the Sahihain. على أن الآمر, that the one commanding كان متعمدا أن يقتل, that he wants to be killed. He's referring to the hadith أفضل الشهداء عند الله حمزة ابن عبد المطلب ثم رجل قام إلى حاكم جائرا فأمره ونهاه فقتل. أخرجه أبو نعيم وقال الهيثمي فيه ضعف. ولهذا تأوله بعض العلماء على أنه لم يكن يعلم أنه سيقتله وعلى أنه قال له ذلك سرا. So how can you say that that hadith is encouraging people to go kill themselves by speaking to a Sultan Ja'ir because it's the highest form of shahada? لا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. They understood it to mean that you go there not thinking he's going to kill you, but then he kills you, that's the highest shahada. And that's how they understood it. وقد أخرج أحمد وابن أبي عصام في كتاب السنة ورجاله الثقات. So in the book of Sunnah, Ahmad relates, and Ibn Abi Isam and the men of this chain are sound. And when you say men, it can include women in hadith tradition. Rijal refers simply to because it's the maqam. You know, it's like not every male is a man, right? Really, it's a maqam. Rajul is a maqam, and that's why the women have that maqam as well. Ar-rijal qawwamun 'ala an-nisa. Sometimes the woman is the rajul in that situation because she's taking care of the husband. This is how it was understood. It's a maqam. Rujula is a maqam. You know, the early people, they said even the goat has a beard. It's not a beard that makes a man. And it's certainly not lack of one that makes a woman, like Bruce Jenner. X and Y can't get out of that one, right? Good luck, right? Can't get out of that one. That's like tic-tac-toe. You'll lose every time, right? If you've got that X chromosome in there, you got to have two of them. So he said, قد أخرج أحمد وابن أبي عصام في كتاب السنة ورجال الثقات كما في مجمع الزوائد عن عياض ابن غنم عنه عليه الصلاة والسلام. The Prophet ﷺ said, من أراد أن ينصح لذي سلطان بأمر فلا يبدي له علانية ولكن ليأخذه بيده فيخلو به فإن قبل منه فذاك وإلا كان قد أدى الذي عليه له. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you want to give advice to a ruler and command him, don't do it publicly, but rather take his hand, go to a private place with him and give it. If he accepts it, good for him. If he doesn't, you've done your obligation. Now you've got everybody shouting them down, right? This is our tradition. قد أخرج, and then وهل ما تقوم به. Now Sheikh is asking a question. It's more of a rhetorical question. وهل ما تقوم به وسائل الإعلام من حث الناس على الخروج وتعريضهم بما فيهم النساء للإهانة والقتل هو المطلوب شرعا أم المطلوب هو الأخذ بالآداب الشرعية في النصح والنظر في المآلات؟ قال الإمام أحمد في جوابه لإسحاق بن هانئ وقد سأله متى يجب على الرجل الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر؟ ليس هذا زمان نهي إذا غيرت بلسانك فإن لم تستطيع فبقلبك وهو أضعف الإيمان ولا تتعرض للسلطان فإن سيفه مسلول. وفي رواية أخرى يجب الأمر إذا لم تخاف سيفا ولا عصا. It's amazing. This is تنبيه المراجع, reminding people of our tradition, that these are our reference points. These people are our reference points. He said that is what these media outlets are doing, we won't name them, right? Like Fox News. There's Arab versions of Fox News too, right? Is what these media outlets are doing encouraging people to go out and expose themselves, including their women, to being humiliated and even killed? Is this what's expected of our Sharia? This is our religion? Or should we be taking these adab al-shar'iyya, these traditions that we have from our ulama of how to do these things? Is this what we should be doing, from giving good advice and thinking about what the results of these actions are going to lead to? This is called nadhar lil-ma'alat, and this is what the usuli scholar does. قال الإمام أحمد في جوابه لإسحاق بن هاني. Imam Ahmad said, answering Ishaq ibn Hani, another great scholar, and he asked him, when is it necessary for a man to command? Good, because كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. This was what made us the best ummah. أمر بالمعروف نهي عن المنكر and إيمان. فلتكن منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير. Let there be amongst you an ummah that does this work, and that's for tab'id, because it's the ulama that are supposed to do it. That's the majority opinion. So he's saying, when do we do that? And what did Imam Ahmad say? لَيْسَ هَذَا زَمَانَ نَهْيًا. This isn't the time to do the nahi with the hand. In other words, at the time of the Sahaba, like Sayyidina Umar, who will challenge me? The man got up, we will. Because at that time, they were all scholars, they were all with the Prophet, they knew the right and wrong. You could do that, the fitna wouldn't have been. He was glad, he was testing them. People think that's for every time and place. He said, that's not this time. If you're doing it with your tongue, that's enough. And if you can't do that, at least do it with your heart. So even the tongue, there's times to be silent. And then what does he say? That's the weakness of Iman. Don't expose yourselves to the Sultan because his sword is unsheathed. In other words, he's got the power. He'll just annihilate you. This is a time when everybody had a sword. He's talking about a time when every Muslim male had a weapon, spears and arrows. He's not talking about a time when they've got F-16s or nuclear weapons or neutron bombs. And people say, oh, what, are you afraid of death? No, we don't throw away our lives. Sabahlala, for no reason. Our goal is not martyrdom without any benefit. Ihtal husnayayn. It's one of the two benefits. Victory or martyrdom. When you go into war, you want people ready to die. You don't want cowards. You want them to run off the field. Those hadiths are there to encourage people when they're confronted with war. But there's times when you don't fight because it's just suicide. And despite all these suicide bombers, our religion does not allow suicide. قاتلوا نفسه في النار. If you kill yourself, you're in hell. Suicide is haram in Islam. People say, what about the man that went over on the catapult? He put pillows all over himself to protect himself. And then he lived. He didn't die. They always use that as the proof for suicide bombing. And he lived. He opened the door, let the Muslims in. He survived. It's permitted to, inghimas fil adu is permitted. You can rush in to protect Muslims. You can rush in with the probability of dying. That's permitted. And many of the ulama mention that. But you can't be the agent of your own destruction. You can't push the button that kills you. It's somebody else has to kill you, and you're doing it for a greater good, to protect other people. Even the Americans recognize that. Most of the Congressional Medal of Honors are given to people that killed themselves to save others. Like if there's 20 men and they throw in a grenade, there are many Marines that have thrown their body on that grenade to protect the others. The West honors that by giving them the highest medal of honor for courage. He sacrificed his life for others. There's nothing wrong with that. But to kill people indiscriminately and to be the agent of your own destruction, that's not in our religion. Because the grenade's there, he knows he's going to die when it goes off, but he chooses to be the only one that dies to save the others. And that's what's permitted. It's not this other thing. Yeah, I had a debate with a well-known scholar from the Arab world. And we had actually a pretty heated debate. And I don't like to have heated debates, but it got pretty heated about suicide bombs. This was about 10 years ago. You know, I told him I've always been against it. I've never, and not because I'm from California or I grew up in a liberal family or something like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I literally told him, if this is Islam, then I'm in the wrong religion. If this is Islam, because it goes against everything that I was taught about human decency. And I just can't believe that this is Islam. He said to me last month, I was with Sheikh Abdullah, we visited him, and he said, I had a debate with Sheikh Hamza about 10 years ago. It took me 10 years to realize that I think he's right. And I had the similar debate with Sheikh Abdullah, and his knowledge is so much vaster than mine, but we discussed it in depth for a long time about this. All the Mauritanian scholars that I know were opposed to it. And the early ulama, when it first showed up, you look at the original fatwas, all the ulama were against it. I don't know what happened. We got smarter ulama. And part of it, if we're honest about it, it's this thing when you're defeated by an enemy, it's like they love life, but we're not afraid of death. And it's kind of how we one-up them. You can't do this. You can take our land, you can control us, but man, you guys, you love life. You won't do this, look at us. And Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam an al-muthla, the Prophet prohibited mutilating a non-Muslim's body. What is blowing up yourself other than mutilating your own body? It's not permitted to mutilate bodies in war. You're not supposed to mutilate bodies. And that to me is a pure mutilation. And then they use ad-darurat tabih al-mahdhurat, necessities permit the impermissible. Tayyib, go with Machiavelli's religion. Necessity, all things are permitted under that rule of necessity. The end justifies the means. It's not Islam, as far as I can tell. So then he says, لَيْسَ هَذَا الزَّمَانِ نَهْيًا. If you change it with your tongue or with your heart, and that's the weakness of Iman, don't expose yourself. Because he has a sword that's unsheathed. And in another riwayah, in another transmission, يَجِبُ الْأَمْرُ إِذَا لَمْ تَخَافْ سَيْفًا وَلَا عَصَى. It's obligation for you to do it as a scholar if you're not afraid of the sword, death, or asa, torture. Bastinado, what they used to call the bastinado, The Muslims, for some reason, they like that. They used to use it beating the soles of feet. It's very painful. They did it in those horrible CIA torture chambers. They would beat the heel because it's very sensitive. You have all the. I once my sandals got stolen. I was in Tunisia, and somebody had one of those these sandals that have all these little points on them. They're like acupressure sandals. And he said, I've only got these. I can loan you these. I said, okay. So, I didn't know you're only supposed to use them for like 5 minutes. And I walked in them. For like days, my feet hurt after that because I walked in them all day. But my kidneys and liver were cleansed by the end of it. So, فإذا كان هذا هو موقف ابن عباس وأحمد والكثير من العلماء في عدم جواز تعريض النفس للقتل والأذى الجسدي. So here we can see this is the position of Ibn Abbas, Tarjuman al-Quran, the translator of the Quran. This is the opinion of Ahmad, Imam Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. He's the Imam. He's called Imam Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. That's his laqab. He's the Imam of the people of Sunnah and Jama'ah. This is mostly from his madhab. Abu Ya'la ibn al-Farra, al-Khallal, these are all Hanbalis. And he's called the Imam of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Nobody hates Ahmad other than a mubtada'. Like Malik is Imam Ahl al-Medina. That's his sharaf. That he's the Imam of the people of Medina. Imam Shafi'i his sharaf is he's the Imam of Quraysh. Right? Quraysh has siyada in our tradition. And Abu Hanifa is Imam al-Azam. He's the greatest of the Imam. They all have their place. Because he got the most of followers. He's going to have the biggest group behind him on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. They're all, kulluhum ala al-haq. But that's his laqab, Ahmad. And this is his position. فَقُلْنَا إِنَّ خُرُوجَ النَّاسِ إِلَى السَّاحَاتِ مِنْ بَابِ إِنْكَارِ الْمُنْكَرِ. So the Shaykh, who is an usuli genius, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, he said, if you want the category of the action, because every action in Islam is categorized. If you want the hukm of what protest is, when you go out in mudaharat, the hukm is amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar. It is, you're enjoining right and forbidding evil. If it's peaceful, that's the ruling. Therefore, it has those 5 conditions. In America, you can do it. They're not gonna shoot you or gun you down, thank God, not yet anyway. And some places, unfortunately, they do. But if you're in Australia, you can do it. But there's a way to do it legally. You have to get the permits and do it the way they ask you to do it, because you're permitted to petition the government for a redress of wrongs in Western constitutional law. Right? You can do it in England. But in some Muslim countries, they know if you do it, the ruler's going to blow you away. What's the hukm then? This needs real ulama. That's why Sheikh Sa'id, the usuli scholar of Damascus, he gave his opinions. People say, oh, he's alim tughat, scholar of the... He said on television, I'm almost dead. Yeah, I have 1 foot in the grave. He was in his mid-80s. He said, I've got 1 foot in the grave. What do I benefit from this? By giving you this advice. Tell me, what's the benefit? He lived in a small apartment. He didn't have a television. He was a zahid. I mean, I knew him personally. I spent time with him. Maybe he did some things wrong. Maybe he said some things that were better left unsaid. We don't know the conditions he was under. We don't know what he was being threatened by the regime. I have a good opinion of scholars, but I know that he was not a sellout. I know that. And nobody can convince me otherwise. So, فهل يجوز للمفتي أن يفتيهم بالخروج في المظاهرات مع العلم لاحتمال ذهاب نفوسهم أو إصابتهم في التظاهر دون أن يكون متحملا إثما ولا مرتكب إثما ذنبا? So let me ask you, Sheikh Abdullah is saying, let me ask you, is it permissible for the mufti to give a fatwa to tell people go out and protest when he knows the probability of them losing their lives and being shot or hit in that protest, without this mufti carrying the sin of that? وشروط وجوب إنكار المنكر 5 عند القاضي أبو يعلى ابن الفراء كالشروط السابقة. And Abu Ya'la, the Hanbali, great Hanbali scholar, he also had 5, except one of his conditions, إلا أنه ذكر شرط استمرار الوقوع في المنكر فإن لم يكن مستمر عليه لم يجب الإنكار. His condition was, if the munkar would self-resolve, like you have a sickness, you have self-resolving sicknesses, the doctor would say, don't treat it. Just go home, drink lots of fluid, and wait till it's over. He doesn't want to give you antibiotics. Why waste the antibiotics on something that's going to self-resolve and it's not going to benefit you? So that's the same thing. If you have a fitna that's self-resolving, and just leave it until it ends. So that's one of his conditions. أنه إذا أمكن إزالته بطريق أسهل تعين. But if he can end it with an easier way, then it becomes an obligation. لأن إزالته بطريق أخرى إما أن تضر بالمنكر بصيغة اسم الفاعل فيكون في حكم الظالم لنفسه وإن كان ضرره على من ينكر عليه كان في حكم الظالم له. So if he's going to harm himself, he's ظالم لنفسه. He's from the ummah, but he's from that first group, مغفور له, it's sinfulness. He's ظالم لنفسه, he's oppressing his own soul. And if it's going to harm the one he's condemning, he's ظالم له كذلك. So, والحقيقة, especially if it's going to cause this ummah a great wound, and what greater wound than destroying the infrastructure of a people's land? I mean, what greater wound than destroying their water, destroying their sewage systems, destroying their homes, let alone destroying their lives. والحقيقة, the reality, أن الفقيه, now this is Sheikh Abdullah, الآن يلحق بالثورات بعد اشتعال الساحة ليلعن في الغالب الظالمة ولكن دون أن يعالج المظلومة. We see the faqih now that when these revolutions begin, he gets out there with them and he's cursing the ruler with them. But has he actually changed the condition of the oppressed? Has he done anything to make their condition better? وَلَا أَنْ يُدَاوِيَ الْمَكْلُومِ Has he treated the wounded? بَلْ رُبَّمَا زَادُهُ كَلَمًا عَلَى كَلَمٍ Maybe he's even increased his wound and made the oppression worse. يحثه على السير في طريق لا نهاية لها من الدم. He's encouraging him on a road that has no end of bloodshed. فقد كان العلماء يمنعون العامة من حمل السلاح ويكتفون بالوعظ. The early ulama used to tell the general people, don't carry swords against them. And they would exhort, ويأمرون العامة بالإنكار بالقلب. They would tell the common people to condemn these things with their hearts. According to the hadith, وإليك هذه الحكاية يقول قاضي أبو يعلاء بن الفراء فصل في وجوب الإنكار على السلطان إذا غصب وعطل الحدود وضرب الأبشار واستأثر بأموال الفيء والغنائم والأعشار فإنه يجب وعظه وتخويفه بالله تعالى فأما بالقتال له وشهر السلاح عليه فلا يجوز ذلك. وقد نص أحمد على هذا في رواية حنبل قال اجتمع فقهاء بغداد في ولاية الواثق إلى أبي عبد الله وقالوا إن هذا الأمير قد تفاقم وفشى يعنون إظهار القول بخلق القرآن وغير ذلك فلا نرضى بامرأته ولا سلطانه. فناظرهم في ذلك وقال عليكم بالنكرة بقلوبكم ولا تخلعوا يدا من طاعة ولا تشقوا عصا المسلمين ولا تسفكوا دماءهم دماءكم ودماء المسلمين معكم وانظروا في عاقبة أمركم واصبروا حتى يستريح بر أو يستراح منه فاجر. It's an amazing story. So he says that Ahmad ibn Hanbal Abu Ya'la ibn al-Farra tells a story in his wujub al-inkar ala sultan, the obligation of condemning a ruler for his injustice. If he steals the wealth of the people, if he's not implementing the laws of the land, the hudud of the sharia, penal codes and things like that. وَضَرَبَ الْأَبْشَارِ He's harming people, striking the humans. وَاسْتَأْثَرَ بِأَمْوَالِ الْفَيْءِ وَالْغَنَائِمِ وَالْعَشَارِ And then he's absconding with the wealth of the populace. He's illegitimately embezzling the public funds. فَإِنَّهُ يَجِبُ وَعْظُهُ وَتَخْوِيفُهُ بِاللَّهِ In that case, it's an obligation to warn him, just like Mustafa Sabri said, warn these people. The revolution's coming. Even though our religion protects you from revolution, if you keep this up, it's going to come whether you like it or not. Even if the people try not to do it, it'll come. Warn them. فَأَمَّا بِالْقِتَالِ لَهُ وَشَهْرُ السِّلَاحِ عَلَيْهِ فَلَا يَجُوزُ As for fighting them, for pulling out weapons and opposing them, that's not permitted. وَقَدْ نَصَّ أَحْمَدُ عَلَى هَذَا فِي رِوَايَةِ حَنْبَلٍ And Imam Ahmad relates this riwayah from the riwayah of Hanbal. He said, اجتمع فقهاء Baghdad. The jurists of Baghdad got together. Now imagine this. This is Baghdad at the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. These are some of the greatest ulama in the whole Muslim ummah. اجتمع فقهاء Baghdad. At the time of Al-Wathiq Billah, who said Khalq al-Quran, this was the Mu'tazilite, were ruling the ummah. They got together with Abi Abdullah. His name was Abu Abdullah. His son was Abdullah ibn Ahmad, who did the Zawaid al-Musnad. His son was a great scholar as well. So he was called Abu Abdullah. They got together with Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who was they recognized him as the greatest scholar then. And he said, Inna hadar amira qad tafaqama. He's doing really, really dangerous, momentous things. Wafasha, it's spreading amongst the people. And he meant by that saying the Quran was created and other things. فَلَا نَرْضَى بِمْرَاتِي We don't accept his imra, his ruler, his imara, the fact that he's amir. We don't accept it. وَلَا سُلْطَانِهِ And we don't give him any authority. فَنَاظَرَهُمْ He debated with them. Nadara is theoretical debate, like looking at proofs and dalils. He reasoned with them. What did he say? عَلَيْكُمْ بِالنُّكْرَةِ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. Reject it in your hearts, what he's doing. وَلَا تَخْلَعُ يَدًا مِّن طَاعَةٍ. Don't remove the hand of ta'ah, the obedience to the ruler. This is what Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayy calls طاعة الاحتمال. Shaykh Abdullah يفسر بين الطاعة. يقول الطاعة في الحديث إذا ننظر للنصوص هناك طاعتان في الحديث. طاعة الاحتمال وطاعة الامتثال. One of them is the ta'ah of obeying the rulers and what they tell us. So if the ruler says, go build a road there, we build the road. Because Sharia says that, you should help the society. You need a road, the Sultan says, build a road. The Sultan says, we're introducing lights into the society. The traffic lights. There's nothing in Sharia about traffic lights. Nothing in the Quran that says, لا تقفوا بالإشارة الخضراء. Don't stop with the لا تقفوا بالإشارة الخضراء وقفوا بالإشارة الحمراء. Nothing in the Quran says stop at a red light, go at a green light. But it's maslahah, it's a human benefit. So if the Amir says you have to stop at a red light and you have to go at the green light, it becomes wajib. If you're going to drive, you have to obey the law. If you run the red light, it's a sin. That's ta'atul imtithal. When it's consistent with the Sharia. Why? Because those red lights and green lights are there to preserve the safety of the people driving. And that's a maslahah. And the Sharia calls to maslahah. لا تلقي بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. Don't destroy yourselves by running red lights. Right? It doesn't literally say that, but we could qiyasan, by understanding it. So those are the two obediences. So he said, don't disobey them. This is called ta'a salbiyah. It's a negative obedience. Don't rebel against them. He's telling the ulama, وَلَا تَشُقُّ عَصَى الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Don't split the unity of the Muslims. Syria was a country under an oppressive regime, undeniably, but the vast majority of Syrians were living in relative peace, and it was safe to go out at night in Damascus. The Libyans were living under a tyrant. I'm not going to deny he was a tyrant, but there was aman. You could go out any time of the day or night, and you didn't fear for your life. Right? These are great blessings. Remember we read that قِلَّةُ الْإِثْمِ بِنِسْبَةِ لِكَثْرَتِهِ خَيْرٌ كَبِيرٌ. That a little bit of sinfulness, in light of a lot of sinfulness, is a great good. Right? So even though these are, what's the benefit of overthrowing them when you're going to create mass chaos? Our ulama said, Sultanun Ghashum khayru min fitnatin tadum, that a tyrant is better than fitna that never ends. This is what our ulama said. So وَلَا تَسْفِكُوا دِمَاءَهُمْ وَدِمَاءَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مَعَكُمْ. Don't shed your blood and the blood of the Muslims with you. وَانْظُرُوا فِي عَاقِبَةِ أَمْرِهِمْ. Think about where this thing is going. وَاصْبِرُوا حَتَّى يَسْتَرِيحَ بَرٌّ أَوْ يُسْتَرَاحَ مِنْهُ فَاجِرٌ. يُسْتَرَاحَ مِنْ فَاجِرٌ. So be patient until you either get relief, right? Or the one who's giving you the problems dies and you get relief from that. مُسْتَرِيحٌ وَالْمُسْتَرَاحُ مِنْهُ. It's from the hadith in al-Bukhari. Now, to end, he gives from Malik radiallahu anhu. Malik was he lived through revolutions. He never joined them. There was a revolution in Medina, Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah. They called him Nafs Zakiyah. That's not his name. He was so pure that they gave him that laqab. He was a direct descendant of the Prophet. He rebelled against the rulers and established a state in Medina for 18 months. Malik never took bay'ah with him. Now, you're telling me these guys are better than, go take bay'ah with Daesh? He didn't take bay'ah with Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah, and you're going to go take bay'ah with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? Malakum kayfa tahkumun. Malik. Because he knew this guy is not going to last, and I'm not going to be part of this. He never took bay'ah with him. Even though he was a righteous man, and what he was doing was from the impulse of khair, to make good. So Imam Malik had a teacher, Abdurrahman ibn Hurmuz, in Medina. And this is a tradition that Qadi Iyad relates في ترتيب المدارك. مفادها, the benefit of this, أن شيخه عبد الرحمن ابن هرمز أنكر على رجل من أهل الأقدار, من أهل المكانة. القدر يعني كان عنده قدر بين الناس, not قدرية like the sect. فهو أنكر عليه من أهل الأقدار لأنه كان يكلم امرأة في أمام بيته. He was speaking to a woman in front of his house in Medina. In those days, the urf, that would have been inappropriate. So أنكر عليه. معه حشمه ومواليه. He had his retinue and he was a wealthy man. He had his retinue and his servants. فأمر مواليه أن يضرب ابن هرمز. So he commanded his servants to go beat up Ibn Hurmuz. They beat him up حتى نقل إلى بيته. أغمي عليه نقل إلى بيته. فالناس صاروا يزورون Ibn Hurmuz. This is one of the big ulama of Medina. He was Malik's teacher. والناس أتوا وهو يشتكي. يقول أنا أنكرت هذا الرجل وانظر إلى ما فعل بي. وكلهم يدعون له بالشفاء والعافية. Imam Malik كان ساكتا. Malik didn't say anything. So they're all saying, oh, you poor man, it's unjust, ya sheikh, ya imam, it's unjust what they did. Imam Malik sakit. Ibn Hurmuz looks at Imam Malik and he says, Imam Malik says to him, Inna hada lam yakun lak. He asked him, why are you silent? He said, you didn't have any right to do that. He's doing munkar. Inkar al-munkar. And this is his student telling him. He said, إن هذا لم يكن لك تأتي إلى رجل من أهل القدر على باب داره ومعه حشمه وموالي. You go to a man in front of his house, in front of his retinue, all the people that, and his servants, and you humiliate him? فقال ابن هرمز فترى أني أخطأت. Do you think I made a mistake? إي والله. Malik said, إي والله. Like, most definitely by Allah, you made a mistake. This is wisdom. And it's not to say, look at the ulama, they want good, but they're not fools. Anyway, there you have it. That's the position of our sunnah, of our ulama. This is what they have traditionally taught. And I know the tradition's in trouble. We have all these people that, it's a mess. But we should do our best to learn this tradition and be guided by it and not do foolish things that end up. And trust me, just like Mustafa Sabri said, there are people wanting our downfall and our destruction. There are demonic forces on this planet that do not want religion to succeed in all of its variations. They want to get rid of religion, Christianity, Judaism, all of it. They just want it out. And that's why religious people have a moral responsibility to be intelligent. Because the thing they always use against us is how stupid we are. And man, do we confirm that stereotype too often. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I'll try to just quickly, if in the US, blacks are being oppressed. I mean, not all blacks are being oppressed. There is a history of racism in the United States. There are many successful African Americans in the United States, but nobody talks about the Native American people. I mean, the Native Americans, it was their land. The African Americans were brought to America unjustly. The Native Americans, it was their land. They're on reservations now, right? So, a lot of people have been oppressed in America. Chinese Americans went through their period. Irish Americans went through. Catholic Irish Americans, not Protestant Irish. Catholic Irish Americans, because the Protestants, the Ulster Plantation, if you know that history, Andrew Jackson was a Protestant Irishman. He's the real first Irish president. But Kennedy was an Irish Catholic. In 1959, 60, they were calling him, saying that they didn't want an Irish president. That was one of the arguments against him, when he was an Irish Catholic. You know? So the Irish had a hard time in the United States for a long time. They were looked at as subhuman, classified. In some areas, they were lower. They were literally the lowest on the totem pole. So I'm very wary of race determining how we identify these problems. I am much more in support of jahiliyyah and ilm, that there is a jahil system in place on this planet that says some people are better than other people. It's not about the color of the skin. The Turks, a lot of them are as white as the moon. So their whiteness is not going to give them any kind of ontological status because they're Turks. So if you want to get your white people right, you know, there's groups called the Anglo-Saxon, the Franks, the Saxons, you know. These are, you know, get your white people right. You want to study about history and oppression? Read Irish history, white as the moon. Read Welsh history, white as the moon. And look what the English did to them. 800 years. Irish oppression, 800 years. They don't speak Gaelic because they cut out their tongues during historical periods for speaking Gaelic. So there's a lot of oppression. Everybody has their oppression narratives, you know. But the Prophet ﷺ, when Abu Dhar, radiallahu anhu, the great Abu Dhar, the Sahabi Abu Dhar, the Ghifari, from one of the lower tribes amongst the Arabs, they were looked down upon, Bani Ghifar. When Abu Dhar called Bilal al-Habashi, Ya ibn Sauda, which is like saying the N-word to the Arabs at that time. You know, it was a humiliating thing. The Prophet didn't say, Ya Unsari, you're a racist. He said, Abu Dhar, anta imrun fik al-jahiliyyah. You're a man that still has some jahiliyyah in him. We need to work on that. So don't alienate people by creating this race war between whites and blacks. It's very dangerous. This is what Iblis does. These narratives are Iblisic narratives. Now you've got blacks, their films. You know, there was a film called 12 Years a Slave. If I was African American and I saw that film, I would just hate white people for the rest of my life. When I wanted to find out who made that film, he was one of the heads of the Israeli intelligence agency, which I find very weird. I think there's people that want race wars on this planet, and they're minions of Shaitan, because Shaitan wants us to fight each other. I was raised by a woman she just didn't have any racism. People that know my mom know my mother. My mother didn't have any racism. She raised us to hate that, of judging people by their skin. She was in the civil rights movement very early on, and I was taught that human beings, color makes no distinction. People should be distinguished by their character, that's what King was asking for. Judge us not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. That's the criteria of Islam. So if you're going to demonize white people, or say the white supremacy power structure and use these terms of critical theory, which is Marxism, if you're going to use those terms, for me, it's a dangerous road for the Muslims to go down. I'm very opposed to it personally. And I appreciate people can say, well, that's because you're white or something like that. I've never considered myself white. I consider myself a human being, first and foremost. I don't consider myself white. You know, if you want, I'll get that spray paint and paint it another color. I could care less, you know. I know it's not easy to be brown in a lot of places, but it's also not easy to be a Igbo vis-a-vis the Fulani in Nigeria. So it's not always about skin. It's not easy to be a Zahrani in Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis other tribes. It's not easy to be, a Bedouin in a lot of Muslim countries today. It's not easy to be a Hartani in Mauritania, you know. It's not easy to be a Zanagi in relation to the Zawaya in Mauritania. They're same Arab tribes, but one of them is the Brahman and the other is the Kishtriya, like the Hindu kind of category. So we have these tribulations all over the world. You know, the Europeans have been the best racists ever, you know. They've been the best at it, but it's a human problem. The Pakistanis have it, you know, Baluchis have it, right? The Pathans have it vis-a-vis the Punjabis, right? The Muhajirs have it vis-a-vis the natives, right? People from Kerala have it vis-a-vis the, you know, seriously, I mean, if you're in India, the Kerala, man, those guys have a hard time. If you're from Kerala, and they're the nicest people in India. I've never met nicer people than people from Kerala. Bengalis are some of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet. They're gentle people. Man, have they had a hard time? Read the history of East Pakistan and the massacres that happened against the Bengalis. So if you want to start talking about oppression, it's like Gandhi said, if you want an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you're going to have a blind and a toothless planet. If that's going to be, our Prophet taught us to try to forgive, to move beyond. He didn't even allow, people commemorate, like you have Holocaust commemorations, and you have all these commemorations like the Nakba in Palestine, you're remembering always these events. The Prophet prohibited that. The Yom Bu'ath was a day the Ansar, the Aus and the Khazraj used to remember the Bu'ath war between the two of them. They used to commemorate it. And they would get out and they would say their poetry. Those events would always lead to fighting. And the Prophet forbade it. Because he was trying to unite people. This is the point. We want to unite hearts. And that's not to deny that there's a real problem of color. I'm not denying that at all. I just think that we should frame these things within our own tradition and not allow others to define our cognitive frames, to use a Dr. Omar term. I mean, he didn't invent that, but he likes that one. Alhamdulillah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha